Continuing our cash tag segment here, focusing on the airlines as a whole, focusing on Southwest. Landon, this is a very, very difficult time, obviously, for this industry. But assuming at some point down the road that things are back to some sense of normal, or whatever the normal is going to be once we get past this virus, from your data so far, is any airline pulling out in front? Is any airline winning in terms of kind of the public loyalty, which we know that this is a space that is just full of loyalty, and consumer loyalty is really what drives this space?
Right. I think that's really important. And we look at consumer happiness to do that. And the way that we do that at LikeFolio is we look at when people are talking about flying on airlines or just the airlines in general, and we look at, are they talking positively or negatively? And we sort of weight those against each other. And we come up with a percent positive. And when we call that sentiment, essentially. And what you've got here is a chart of the four major airlines and their percent positive over time. And you can see, I would say that the loser of the group appears to be Delta, who took the biggest hit around the quarantine and has bounced back, but not as much as the others. United kind of took its place and passed it, which is really a big. You go back to the beginning of the chart, United was 8 or 10 points behind Delta, and now is actually higher. Southwest, small dip, and actually now at all-time highs when it comes to consumer happiness. So I'd say they are the winner. Clearly, they're the best. They're the best as far as consumer loyalty. And I think it comes down to some of the policies that they had in place going into all of this, which was no change fees and last minute. You could literally change your flight an hour before or cancel it an hour before with no penalties and no bag fees, things like that. And they just sort of took care of the consumer. Now, people may argue about whether it's nice to have an assigned seat or having to be herded in like cattle, like Southwest does. I like assigned seats, but I do like those change fees. So the lack of change fees. So Southwest doing extremely well there. Delta recovering, but I think they took a little bit of a hit here. But what's interesting is, it's really, I think it's important to look at how they will do when consumers come back to the market. But it's all losers right now. I mean, obviously, we've got data from TSA showing the amount of check-ins, and it's down about 68% year over year. That is staggering. That is just an unbelievable amount of flights that aren't happening or people that aren't checking in. I know that Southwest's schedule is less than half of what it was. It's about 40 or 45% year over year. So they're canceling all kinds of flights, Kevin, to your point. And so I do think that probably the airlines need a bailout. I mean, we can get into the politics of using cash to buy back your shares and then asking for money from the government later. But it's a matter of fact that people really need to be able to fly, and they're not going to. So that's a tough spot for the consumer right now. But when you look at the cash situation, that's kind of interesting. Jenny alluded to that. I think that's really important. Southwest is sitting on a boatload of cash. They've got about $15 billion, and their daily burn over the last few months has gone down from $30 million a day to $19 million a day. So that means that at the current pace, they've got 2 years left, which is a very long runway considering how bad things are right now. So they're going to make it out the other side. They're going to be just fine, and then it's just a matter of timing. When does all this end? When does life get back to normal? And I think we'll see that the loyalty created through some of these changes in policy or some of the more consumer-friendly policies is going to help Southwest very much once that happens. Here we've got the purchase intent chart, people talking about flying. I mean, you can see this is kind of what you would expect. It's a massive drop-off around March or April, and it just hasn't recovered yet. And so it's just a matter of time. When is this going to happen? But they've got the consumer base that wants to travel, and they don't have that international exposure, which is obviously really bad right now. You can't basically go anywhere international as far as U.S. customers. So Southwest, I think, is poised to be the winner on the other side. Just a question of when.
So Landon, here's my question, and I'm looking at your airline sentiment chart. What do you guys have any color on what Delta did wrong during this pandemic? We see that Southwest has held its own, and it looks like they were battling it out with Delta, and now there's a clear Southwest is clearly the winner. What did United Airlines do right during this pandemic? What did Delta do wrong? Do you guys have any more deeper dive into that data?
The only thing I can think of, no, we don't have any hard data on that. I think it has to do with international exposure. I think Delta has a lot more international exposure. They've always been a high service airline, always had a good experience for the consumer. I think, though, that when you have a situation where you're charging people $200 to change their flight or cancel their flight per leg, that can really frustrate consumers, especially when you're in a situation where who knows, maybe your neighbor got COVID and now you're not sure if you should be traveling. So you're looking at canceling and they want to charge you $200 per leg. Things like that really frustrate customers. They have implemented some policies that, help you out on that. I recently had to cancel a flight that was through Delta and they waived that fee, but I think they should just make it more just public and just say, this is how it's going to be, kind of like Southwest. There's just a very nice feeling going into buying a ticket where you're not 100% sure you're going to make it because it's a couple months out and who knows what might happen. And if it's Southwest, you get your money back, no questions asked. And with United or Delta or certainly American, you have to hope that they waive those high fees. And so we don't have any specific data, but they are bouncing back about to where they were. But my guess is that Southwest is as high as they are because they had those very consumer-friendly policies heading into all of this.
Landon, when I look at all of this and on that consumer sentiment comparison chart is really where this sticks out. And for those at home, the scale's a little bit small, so you can't necessarily tell. It's really that last leg lower that comprises the pandemic and the reaction that consumers had to it. This was more of a referendum on the three major airlines outside of Southwest and their policies, which are largely similar. I know that the major differences is kind of the expectations around things. To your point, Delta, a little bit higher service, typically a more higher quality experience is why they've been so strong for so much time. But I think that this pandemic really highlighted kind of the shortcomings of their policies, where Southwest was already in place for a very highly flexible kind of a situation that really benefited from this. The question, though, Landon, from everything that you've watched and all these different trends that you follow in all different industries, is that loyalty potentially that they gain, Southwest that is, versus their other three major competitors just by simply having a different, more flexible policy enough to overcome, once this is all back to normal, that loyalty that was already established? If I'm a consumer who flies a particular airline, say I fly United Airlines or I fly Delta, did Southwest do enough to gain my loyalty and gain me as a flyer on the other side, or did they just play the best defense?
I think it's more of a best defense situation. I think that once things get back to normal, everyone will just go back into their habits. I mean, a lot of travel is based on business, and most businesses have they have good rewards programs with certain airlines, and they want you to fly that airline. A lot of times that happens, and Southwest is usually not the one that takes advantage of that. So I think that to answer your question, I think it's mostly a good business, a good defense, but I think they're going to pick up some people. Especially if you have a situation where, it used to be if you canceled a flight, it was because you didn't plan well or something crazy happened. And it was just super rare for you to have to cancel a flight. Airlines canceled them more frequently, but for the consumer themselves, it was a big deal if you canceled a flight and you had to change. And I think that's why people kind of put up with the $200 change fees. But now I think there's a lot more frequency of people having to cancel flights because who knows who knows got COVID and you might be on a quarantine list, whatever. Some kid at your kid's school got it. Who knows? And so now there's way more potential for you to have to cancel your flight. And it's just nice to have that in place. And I think that also people are just, once they see that and they say, oh, you can do that on Southwest, they start to look into you don't have any check bag fees, you don't have any overhead fees or carry-on fees or some of the stuff that other companies charge for. So I think that it's a best defense kind of situation. And then also, like we talked about, international travel is huge. Southwest is not big on international. Our data is showing that interest in international travel has dropped about 50%. And so that is going to affect Southwest by far the least. So I think they kind of just got lucky on that one. But the consumer policies were definitely great going in. Side note, road trip data year over year is plus 75%. So people are driving far more than they're flying. Airlines really need to get things back to normal.